but let's see. Are we good to go? Yes? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this press conference hosted by WWF. That's the Worldwide Fund for Nature. We are here to mark the beginning of the second week here at COP15. Outside, the temperatures keep dropping, but inside the rooms, things are hotting up. We've got 3 more sleeps until the high-level segment starts. So it's a good moment to take stock how it's going and what ministers should get ready for when they arrive. My name is Bernadette Fischler-Hooper. I am the head of international advocacy with WWF UK, and I'm joined today by some fantastic WWF leaders. So here's what we're going to do today. Firstly, we're going to hear from our Director General, Marco Lambertini, about the state of play, what's at stake if negotiations continue at the current slow pace. Then we've got Guido Broekhoven here, who's the head of policy research and development with WWF International. He will tell us about key bottlenecks in the negotiations and what negotiators need to crack on with in order to achieve an ambitious, effective, and implementable GBF. After that, we will hear from Lucia Ruiz, the Biodiversity and Finance Coordinator with WWF Mexico, who will tell us how the 30 by 30 target is doing. We're eager to hear if negotiators are any closer to finding common ground. And then last but most certainly not least, we will hear from Manuel Pulgar Vidal. He's the leader of WWF's climate and energy practice, and he will update us on the current status of nature-based solutions, on the action agenda's views on how the GBF is developing so far, and also how the GBF is linking up with the climate agenda. So there's lots to look forward to. Our speakers will each present for 5 minutes, and then there will be, of course, time for questions. As always, we will be also available afterwards at the exit of the green room for further conversations or more in-depth discussions. So let's get on. Without much further ado, I'm very happy to pass on to Marco to kick us off.
Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you, everybody. Great to see so many of you here and also online. First of all, I cannot underscore enough the importance of this week. This week could be truly an historic moment for nature and for our future. On one hand, we feel the urgency to take action to halt and reverse nature loss. The other side of the existential challenge our civilization is facing, alongside climate change, in fact, interconnected to it. But on the other hand, it's also historic because of the opportunity we have to course correct and to build a nature-positive future, to move away from a nature-negative society and economy and embrace a nature-positive. At a time when the evidence of our impact on the planet is overwhelming, science has never been clear also about the consequences this is having, not just on the natural world itself, but on us, on our lives, on our economy, on our prosperity, on equity, on justice, our health, our well-being. This is a new way of looking at nature conservation. It's not any longer only a very important moral duty to coexist with the rest of life on the planet, but is increasingly an existential imperative for humanity and a security issue for our society and economy. Nature holds the key to most of the solutions to our challenges as a society, from poverty to malnutrition, food security, water security, health, happiness, mental health in cities and outside. This is now a new recognition, a new reckoning of the importance of rebalancing our relationship with nature. And this week, the world leaders have the opportunity to embrace an ambitious, science-based, necessary global goal and global plan to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. I'm highlighting halt and reverse by 2030 because science is telling us that if we don't do that, and urgently, entire ecosystems, coral reefs, mangroves, entire ecoregions, the Amazon, the ice caps, are going to head fast to tipping points with tragic consequences for the stability of the planet. Halt and reverse by 2030, to build a nature-positive world, is the minimum that this conference needs to deliver, and is the equivalent to the 1.5, below 2 degrees, that Paris agreed on climate. Sets the direction, set the vision, clear and measurable, to then develop a plan to deliver it. This is the opportunity to set clarity and ambition on nature, as we did for climate in Paris. And to send the signal to society, to the markets, to the economy, that we need to start changing the way we relate to nature. Developing in a sustainable way, embracing through sustainable development. There are two dimensions that are key in the negotiations today. To simplify, there are many elements, but two major blocks. The first one is ambition. Leaders need to focus on what's necessary, what science is telling us has to be done, not on the lowest common denominator of what's politically negotiable in, we know, a geopolitically fractured world. Nature can bring us together, and nature is the key to the solution for everyone. Everyone will benefit and everyone will suffer depending on the outcome of our COP15 and the global plan that will be agreed here. Ambition is the first dimension. As I said earlier, halt and reverse by 2030. Apologies to repeat it so many times, but it really is the 1.5 degrees equivalent for nature. Halt and reverse by 2030, nature positive, is that direction, that ambition. And that should permeate the whole global biodiversity framework, from the mission down to the different targets on species, footprint, etc., etc. Then the other block is actually implementation and means of implementation and the resources that are needed to implement the ambition. Right now, we are stuck in a chicken and an egg situation where everybody's right and, frankly, everybody's wrong. Everybody's right and wrong at the same time, because it's true, absolutely true, that in order to deliver the ambition, we need the right, commensurate resources. Fact number one, we know that we need more resources, more direct financial resources for nature conservation and sustainable management. Fact two, we know that those resources need to go predominantly to the global south, because this is where more biodiversity is, less means are available. And the third fact is that those resources cannot come from one source only, but needs to come from a variety of sources: public, private, ODA, multilateral, different funds, different instruments, all together need to add up to the need to deliver the ambition. But on the other hand, the ambition itself is the reason for why we need to mobilize resources. So instead of being chicken and egg, ambition and resources, instead of saying I cannot agree to the ambition until I commit to the resources, or vice versa, I can't commit the resources until I have defined my ambition, the two things need to go hand in hand. Hand in hand, and both are super important and equally critical for an effective global biodiversity framework. I'm going to finish by saying simply that ambition and resources are needed, because if we fail to do that, if we fail to deliver a fit-for-purpose, future-proof global biodiversity framework, we're going to allow, first of all, business as usual to go ahead, and that means more loss of nature in the next decade, in this current decade, by the end of the decade. We're going to provide a cover for vested interests that are benefiting from a nature-negative economy, and most importantly, we are going to jeopardize a safe future for our children, their children, and generations. Leaders this week needs to choose the right side of history, and we are confident that it's still possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marco. Ambition, implementation, resources. It's really great that you remind countries what they actually came here for. Now I'm handing over to Guido, who's going to tell us a little bit about the key bottlenecks in the negotiations.
Thank you. I'll talk a bit more about where we are in terms of that ambition on conservation. We believe that 30 by 30 is an important element of that achieving ambition on conservation, and Lucia will be talking a bit more about that. But 30 by 30 alone is not sufficient. We must address the drivers of biodiversity loss. The footprint of production and consumption needs to be halved by 2030. Not only to take the pressure off that 30%, but also because there's still a lot of biodiversity in the other 70%. That also needs to be conserved. Now, that ambition to address the drivers of biodiversity loss is clearly under threat in the current negotiations. There is debate about whether the footprint should be included in the framework. There's debate whether the framework should identify and act on the sectors that drive biodiversity loss. Infrastructure, for example, is under threat in the framework. Health, the clear link between nature, biodiversity, and health is under threat in the framework. It's by no means guaranteed that it will be referenced. Now, if we lower the ambition on the drivers and on the footprint, that means that the overall ambition of the framework on species, on conservation of ecosystems also is under threat. The Aichi targets aspired to halt species loss by 2020. That was not achieved. Now, to just try again for the next 10 years to halt species loss is not good enough. We need to put all efforts into halting species loss as soon as possible. We need to also preserve remaining intact ecosystems rather than continue to destroy these ecosystems. What message would this COP send if we allowed the continuation of the loss of intact ecosystems? So that overall level of ambition and conservation is really under threat. Now, just a few additional words on resource mobilization. Unfortunately, I can't say much about that because there's not much progress to report on at this stage. There are two tracks in which resource mobilization is being negotiated. One is the goals and targets of the framework itself. There's an additional track to work out the details through a resource mobilization strategy. And what's worrying us at this stage, that we can see very little progress in these complicated discussions in both tracks. In the targets and goals itself, it hasn't been discussed yet. In the resource mobilization strategy, there's clearly still a lot of work that remains to be done. And indeed, the cost of inaction, of not investing in conservation, in addressing the drivers now, will come back to haunt us later down the road. So what we really want to see in the coming days, before the ministers arrive, parties need to continue to lift brackets. They need to address ambition by adding numbers, beginning to discuss numbers in targets, not only in targets, also where we want to be in terms of outcomes by 2030. They need to make the framework effective by including ambition on conservation and ambition on drivers and footprint and ambition on resource mobilization. Thank you.
Many thanks, Guido. So it looks like the negotiators and then also the ministers have their work cut out, and let's hope this doesn't end in a game of chicken. Speaking of 30 by 30, I will now pass on to Lucia, who's going to tell us more about that.
Thank you, Bernadette. Morning to everyone. On Friday, negotiations on Target 3, most commonly known as 30 by 30, began. There is a spirit of commitment. We've seen that parties are advancing on conversations, and the general sense at COP regarding this target is that this should be a global target, but also ensuring that quantitative figures are given the same importance as qualitative elements. To ensure conservation outcomes and achieve the Convention's first objective on conservation, but also, as Marco was saying, a nature-positive world by 2030, we need to address these qualitative elements, including making sure we conserve the most important places or the places that are more rich on biodiversity. And that is why we need to include representativeness. Also, making sure that these protected areas are connected to make sure that species and genetic flows can actually flow from one place to the other, so connectivity. And also, that effectively managed, making sure that they have enough resources, that they have enough staff. And additionally, to ensure equitable governance, we need functional, inclusive, participatory, and gender-sensitive processes of decision-making that are bottom-up, but also horizontal, and are equitably managed. In this sense, we must recognize the diversity of realities on the ground with a spirit of co-creation, and also to build alliances. This cannot be a top-down approach. For WWF Target 3, or 30 by 30, this is at the core of our hearts and actions at WWF. However, also as Guido mentioned, it is not a standalone target. Achieving 30 by 30, on the one hand, will allow to have a spillover and advance other targets. But also we need to recognize that area-based conservation is not enough to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. And we need ambition in species-related and driver-related targets, but also make sure that means of implementation are also given the same importance, and that we leave this COP with a robust implementation and ambition. What is happening in the next days for Target 3? We are looking forward on how parties will be addressing specifically how protected and conserved areas are being part of this wider land and seascapes approaches. And in the upcoming days, negotiations of Target 3, the text that has not been negotiated, we're looking forward on how indigenous peoples and local communities will be considered. In this context, we consider that free, prior, and informed consent is a necessity to include in this target. We need to make sure that indigenous peoples and local communities, I repeat, are part of the decision making and are not only considered as another element, as another part of it. Finally, we are worried, and also making reference to what you mentioned, Guido, that Target 3 negotiations might be stalled and affected until resource mobilization negotiations advance. And we think that there might be some conversations happening on how resource mobilization should also be targeted on and be commensurate to the ambition that we are following on Target 3. So this would be a short introduction to what is happening, and we hope that negotiations on Target 3 advance in the upcoming days before the high-level segment takes place. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucia, for telling us what's important on 30 by 30, but also reminding us that there's more to the GBF than the 30 by 30 target. So now we're going to hear from Manuel on several topics, starting with Naturebased Solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette, and thank you to you all for this opportunity. So, in some minutes, parties will start to discuss in room 220E, target 8, that it is related to nature-based solutions. And what we heard in the first week, it is still some opposition of some countries, fortunately not too much, around 7 to 8 countries, to have the GBF including nature-based solutions as a key tool, as a key instrument. So what I would like to raise today, it is argument based in this title, what if not? What it could be the level of loss of the Biodiversity Convention and of the GBF if the GBF doesn't include nature-based solutions as a key part of its content. Let me start by saying something important. All countries represented here in COP15 have already agreed on nature-based solutions when they adopted the UNEA 5.2 resolution in March of 2022. Because as you know, that was the first time ever that nature-based solutions was formally adopted by parties in a multilateral process. So there are no excuses of any countries to say that they haven't already approved or decided or adopted that resolution. But it has been not only UNEA 5.2. As you know, COP27 in the Sharm el-Sheikh cover decision also included nature-based solutions and referred to UNEA 5.2, as well as previously it was adopted by Ramsar and by UNCCD. So this is the only convention that it is not yet recognizing the importance of nature-based solutions. But let me say something important, and tell me, Bernadette, if I am taking too much time, that if CBD is not able to recognize nature-based solutions, the level of loss, it would be for CBD and for the GBF, because they won't exercise its role as the authority of nature. Because it is the CBD and the GBF who could define through principles what does it mean to secure ecosystem integrity and biodiversity net gain. If the CBD reject that, some other community or some other convention will take the role of the CBD. Mostly when we know that MBS has already gotten a strong political traction. And the only exception it is with the CBD. But that moves me to something also important, that it is that if the CBD is planning to move toward this trend of addressing the intertwined crisis, they have to recognize MBS as an important tool to address that intertwined crisis in between climate and nature. And let me finish by saying some important things, very short for sure. It is not true that nature-based solutions it is a market mechanism or a mechanism for offsetting. It is not. It has never been created as that way. It is not true that nature-based solutions it is not respecting rights. It is a rights-based a rights-based instrument, and it has included clearly safeguards in all the resolution that it has been adopted. It is not true that there is a competition in between ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions are complementary mechanisms. And finally, nature-based solutions, it is not that it will diminish the financial resources. It's all the opposite. It will unlock resource mobilization, as it has been mentioned by many communities. So our encouragement it is to have countries, parties adopting nature-based solutions as a key instrument for having a strong outcome through the global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Manuel, for reminding us what's at stake if nature-based solutions will not be included. And there is a lot to say about that. Right. Now we are ready for questions. I would like to invite journalists, and I emphasize journalists, to step forward. Please introduce you with your name and your outlet, and try to keep the question short because then we have more time for answers. I'm seeing over here the lady with the glasses, and then the gentleman next to her, and the lady in the front. Let's do those three first.
Hi, Orla Dwyer from Carbon Brief. My question is for Guido. I'd love to hear your feedback on the stocktake plenary on Saturday and how you thought country statements and negotiating group statements were.
Hi, I'm James Deneen from New Scientist. I'm curious for any thoughts on this, but has there been any movement around quantifying the scale of the resources necessary to meet ambitious targets? Have you heard any numbers thrown about?
Hi, Phoebe Weston from The Guardian. Wanted an update on Target 15 on making nature disclosures for companies mandatory. Thanks.
All right. So I think Guido will try to get back to you on all three of those, but maybe Marco wants to also complement this. Let's go.
Thanks. Mood in the room. I think we were all there. We can all make our own assessment of the mood in the room. For us, it indicates that publicly parties are still quite far apart on a number of key elements, and particularly resource mobilization. I think it really depends on the topics, and some of the other topics we see very constructive dialogue and a will to move forward and remove brackets. However, some of these key issues, resource mobilization, target 3, digital sequence information, we need to see more progress and convergence still. Maybe I'll first go.
Yeah. Just on this one, I think absolutely right, Guido. We are still a long way away, but we are seeing flashes of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think I have to say this week, we're feeling much more constructive engagement. There is a sense of pressure and urgency compared to the beginning of the negotiations last week. So the mood, I think, is in a slightly better place than we were at the beginning.
Thanks very much. We've got 5 more minutes, so I think we can take 2 more quick questions.
There were 2 more questions.
Oh, sorry. Apologies. I'm ahead of my time. So
very briefly on the scale, well, there's various numbers that have been published over the past few years in terms of the scale of investment that is needed. One number that we are hearing a lot about is 700 billion US dollars. The actual number that will be required for the implementation of the GBF will depend on the ambition of the GBF. The higher the ambition, the more resources will be required, and also there will be pressure then to provide those resources. Maybe very briefly on target 15, that is addressing the role of the business. That is an essential target for us because it will identify the role of government in putting in place policies and regulatory frameworks to hold businesses account. And the first step to do that is to request them to disclose in a mandatory way their dependencies and relations to nature. And we think that's an important target to set the bar for businesses. Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I add one comment on the business? Because you, I'm sure, followed the rather shocking figure that was published around COP27 of, I think it was 600 or 700 lobbyists from corporates being in the COP. Well, I have to tell you, my feeling, and actually more than my feeling, the figures here are showing exactly the opposite. First of all, we have never had so many businesses attending a biological diversity convention, COP. But secondly, the businesses that are here are not lobbyists, are actually businesses that want to understand how to contribute to fix the biodiversity issue. So I want to stress that because I think the business constituency here in COP15, by and large, I would say it's very much engaged in trying to find a solution and asking government to create the level playing field that they need to begin to comply and contribute to a nature-positive future.
Short in relation to target 15. So yeah, as Guido has already mentioned, it is an essential target that it could be strongly complemented if we can get by the end of this week, around the 17th, a clear mandate for an action agenda for nature. That is a key one. This is a convention that has worked most of the time strongly disconnected of sectors and actors. And what we do need it is to bring into the table for the implementation of the GBF all the sectors, all the actors, and one of those, it must be the business sector, to have clearly, through regulations, have them clearly fulfilling with targets as target 15. So I hope also and encourage parties that during the high-level segment on the 17th, we can get a clear and strong mandate for the action agenda for nature or for the CBD.
thanks very much. I'm terribly, terribly sorry. We have only 2 more minutes left, so there's no more time for questions in the room. But since we really want to answer all your questions, please do come and find us outside the green room. We're there and we're very happy to answer all the questions. It's just right here, right now. We're just out of time and we have to leave the room for the next people who want to come in. So huge apologies for that and really looking forward to talking to you more in a minute. Thank you very much, everybody.